2020 and 2021 have seen some pretty epic ransoms being paid by companies that at one point in time you would have assumed would never pay. Ransomware groups have undertaken a rebranding of sorts. They have their business model pretty well tuned, and their communications with their victim has changed from the gun pointed at their head tactic to a more "we are your business partner and here to help" sort of theme. The US Congress released a memorandum on ransomware groups, which makes for interesting reading, and I'm going to summarize most of the findings in this piece too. 3 of the most noteworthy ransomware attacks in 2021 were CNA, a US insurer, Colonial Pipeline, and JBS, a food manufacturer. These were the 3 attacks that the US Congress memo focuses in on too, primarily because of the impact, the scale of the ransoms paid, and the different groups that were cited as the attackers in each case. All 3 companies were hit with ransomware. In all 3 cases, it was a small security lapse that led to the breach. All 3 paid the ransom. All 3 got discounts on the ransom that they paid. And all 3 got what was promised to them after paying. With one small exception, JBS never actually saw the proof the data was deleted, but all the other promises were carried through. There's a table in the article that compares each of the attacks. What is far more interesting than these sort of cold facts is the way that the attackers, both in these cases and more broadly, have sort of rebranded in such a way that they can effectively apply more pressure on the victims to pay the ransom. Ransomware is a largely financially driven business model. Therefore, seeking that not so elusive return on investment becomes the primary, if not the only, priority for these groups. The 3 most popular tactics for ensuring the pressure to pay is firmly and increasingly applied to the victim are: number 1, increasing the ransom demands over time. Not a particularly new tactic in itself, but it has proven to be highly effective. Firstly, it conjures up the fear of loss in its victims, much like missing out on a great discount in a store. Secondly, it allows them to increase the cost and then be seen as sort of generous when they discount it again, a well-established sales tactic. Finally, this tactic can catch organizations out, especially if they're going to pay the ransom themselves, as opposed to through an agent. They may not have a digital asset wallet set up, and this can take over a week to do. Number 2, threatening to release any data that they have appropriated. Again, an old but reliable tactic. Threatening to make the damage worse can feel incredibly persuasive, especially in the heat of a crisis. Attackers have combined this reliable tactic with another, which is contacting the clients of the victims, informing them that this data has been appropriated, and then reassuring those clients that so long as the victim pays, no data will be published. This sort of Hunger Games-esque tactic actually gets the clients applying the pressure to the victim to pay the ransom. Number 3, communicating in a reassuring manner and offering additional benefits to paying. This is one of the newer tactics we've seen. Attackers have turned to using sort of helpful language and offering multiple benefits to paying, including security reports and recovery vendor lists. And it's this 3rd tactic that's a bit more friendly and the one I want to look at in more detail. The attackers messaged JBS initially asking for $22.5 million in ransom. They informed them that if they didn't pay, it would double. They also warned JBS that they had exfiltrated data too, and that they said, if you don't reply within 3 days, it will be posted on our news site. However, in the spirit of cooperation, yeah, right, they also added, we can unblock your data and keep everything secret. They also offered a discount for fast payment. They cast themselves as business people and told JBS, don't panic, we are in business, not war. They also offered additional benefits to paying, including a security report. JBS ended up agreeing on a payment of $11 million. They claimed that the cost of recovery, along with the exfiltrated data, was so huge that this made it the right decision. In the case of Colonial Pipeline, the attackers worked hard to portray themselves as more business partners or consultants than criminals. In their conversations with Colonial Pipeline, the attackers actually recommended data recovery companies they could use after they had paid the ransom. The attackers also claimed that they helped more than 100 companies. The use of the word help and support appears a lot in the 2021 messages from the attackers. That said, they initially demanded a ransom of 4.8 million, but informed Colonial Pipeline that the price would basically double to 9.6 million after a set amount of time. However, they ended up paying 4.4 million. The attackers initially told CNA that the ransom would be 999 Bitcoin, which at the time I think was around $55 million. The attackers were a little bit more pushy in this case. Without warning, they increased the demand to 1,099 Bitcoin and accused CNA of wasting time. They were also a little bit more aggressive in their initial communications, talking about the amount and the quality of the data that they'd appropriated, and they threatened that it will hit them hard if it was leaked. They did soften somewhat eventually and adopted more of a helpful persona, reassuring CNA that so long as they paid, they would ensure that no mention of the incident would be made, and they also promised not to publish any of the data nor talk to the press. So why the move to portray themselves as a friend, not a foe? The drive to get a ransom paid means that a few different factors have arisen in the ransomware ecosystem. Firstly, the days where we say they are criminals and unlikely to be true to their word seem to be long gone, especially for the major groups partaking in the ransomware business model. Each group now has a reliable reputation to maintain that is vital for their economic survival. If groups are paid by companies or insurers, and then fail to hold good on their promises to release the keys or delete the data or keep quiet, then there will be a black mark against that group's name, and the chance of being paid next time actually goes down. This creates a sort of parasitic relationship that means that for them to make money, they need to deliver on what is promised. For example, the attackers told CNA that it's in our interest to do as agreed, and it really is. That's of course not to say that the issuing of the key will always work. There are a lot of other factors that impact the ability to recover data, but it does mean that because of the due diligence conducted prior to deciding to pay, it is an important factor. Secondly, ransomware as an industry, if you can call it that, has become professionalized. Now that's not giving them sort of undue credit, but it is a fact that these groups are extremely adept at all the key ingredients of organized crime, especially the washing and off-ramping of currency. Organized crime is the professionalization of crime for the most part. As such, the development of more business-like persona aids them in all manner of tasks required for the effective execution of their sort of main service offering. It is therefore imperative that we treat them, assess them, and deal with them with this point firmly in mind. To do otherwise would be greatly underestimating them. Why is this analysis important? My knee-jerk reaction is always to tell clients, don't pay the ransom, you're funding criminality. That has sort of become something of an idealist notion, though. Analyzing previous cases and noting the ransom demands, timeframes, payments actually allows us to best prepare for a ransomware attack ourselves. Preparation is key here and saves crucial time, regardless of whether you pay or not. Jake Moore, cybersecurity specialist at ESET, comments, the only way to break the cycle of ransomware is to avoid paying the ransoms, but this involves the strongest preventative measures possible. Such mitigation techniques are best found when business simulate ransomware attacks and test their restoring methods. He added that every minute offline can cost eye-watering amounts of money, pointing at the need for prior planning and preparation, however good you think your defenses may be. So some key things to consider in your plans. Number one, discuss with your crisis management team and your board members if, when, and in what circumstances you would consider paying a ransom. Have a playbook for how you would acquire cryptocurrency quickly if needed. Have communication statements pre-drafted to cover how you're going to inform stakeholders of both the ransom demand and your decision regarding the payment. And finally, rehearse. Run a cyber crisis exercise to allow your CMT to practice those roles in a ransomware scenario. A crisis is not the time to try and piece together a response that you could have planned, tested, and have ready to deploy.